At my parents' 41st anniversary, my sister-in-law suddenly stood up, accused me of stealing, until I laughed and asked the restaurant owner to step forward. My gut still clenches when I recall that night. It was my parents' 40th anniversary, a lovely celebration of nearly 4 decades of love. But then my sister-in-law Brielle made an accusation so horrible and startling that it destroyed the whole room. She pointed at me, her eyes flaming, and said that I had taken her pocketbook. But, unbeknownst to her, I had predicted everything. The expression on everyone's faces when the truth eventually came out was priceless. You see, in order to really comprehend what happened that night, you must first understand Brielle. Since my brother Nathan brought her to our family 7 years ago, she's been on a never-ending drive to become the queen bee. She belongs to a wealthy family. Her father runs a chain of premium vehicle dealerships. And trust me, she will never forget that. I tried to be honest with her at first. I really wanted Nathan to be happy. And if Brielle was his option, I was determined to make things work. I asked her to lunch, recommended shopping trips, and even volunteered to help them plan their wedding. But every time, Brielle found a subtle, sneaky method to bring me down. She'd scoff at my basic flat, ask whether my clothing were from a bargain store, or say that my graphic design work was adorable, but not as significant as her job or her father's enterprise. It was exhausting. The most violent attacks were typically carried out at family gatherings. I recall 4 Christmases ago she accidentally spilled red wine all over a dress I had spent weeks designing and sewing herself. Then, the Thanksgiving before last, she publicly declared that it was so brave of me to come to dinner alone again, as if I were some miserable spinster. At my niece Mia's baptism, she had the audacity to tell her extended family that my baby present was kind given your financial situation. I gulped it down and smiled through tight teeth. Not for her, never for her, but for Nathan, who appeared oblivious to his wife's actions. And for my lovely niece, Mia. She's still so innocent and lovely, and the notion of producing turmoil that may harm her made me stay mute for years. My parents, Richard and Elaine, are in their early 70s. They're traditional peacekeepers who feel that family unity is worth virtually any cost. My father was a high school principal for 33 years, and my mother is a nurse. They instilled in us the value of forgiveness and treasured family relationships. When Brielle's actions became too blatant, they would just change the subject or attempt to separate us. It was aggravating, but I recognized their nature. Nathan, my older brother by 3 years, was often stuck in the midst. We were quite close growing up. He defended me from bullies and taught me to ride a bicycle. He was my confidant throughout my adolescence. However, after Brielle, he transformed. He grew aloof, canceling our weekly sibling dinners and inventing excuses. When I ventured to gently bring up Brielle's treatment, he'd become defensive, accusing me of envy or being oversensitive. She simply has a distinct communication style. Tess, he'd say, you need to try harder to understand her. My own brother dismissed my sentiments. That hurt. My younger sister Holly was my sole genuine ally. Holly, 2 years my junior, was the family's rebel, expressing her mind regardless of the repercussions. She saw right through Brielle and didn't hesitate to call her out, making her Brielle's second favorite target. To be honest, Holly was considerably less concerned about the jabs than I was. Do you know what your problem is? Holly once told me while rolling her eyes. You still care what the witch thinks. Stop, give her power. Easier said than done when every family gathering seemed like a psychological battleground. Let me tell you, the preparations for that infamous meal began 4 months ago. My parents announced their 41st anniversary, a significant milestone that warranted something absolutely spectacular. I offered to plan a supper at Salvatore's, their favorite Italian restaurant, and where they had their first date. I poured my heart into it. Custom meals, a selection of relevant songs, inviting their oldest friends, making a presentation of family images, and even generating stunning custom invites. Naturally, Brielle had to interject herself. First, she contacted the restaurant behind my back to reschedule our reservation time. Then she phoned my invited guests and suggested an alternative dress code. She even purchased a completely different cake than the one I had painstakingly chosen based on my parents' preferred tastes, saying hers was more sophisticated. When I approached her, she acted innocent. Oh, I thought we were planning this together. Nathan added. You probably needed help since you have so little experience with this kind of upscale event. My brother denied saying anything like that, but he also refused to urge Brielle to back off. So I adjusted. I compromised. I just focused on making the evening ideal for my parents. By the time the day arrived, I was fatigued from dealing with her interference, but I was determined not to let her spoil it. Salvatore's was a quaint restaurant nestled in Chicago's Little Italy. Marco, the owner's son, assisted me in reserving their most romantic corner table and duplicating the first date meal. The private dining space was illuminated with warm amber light. Red and white flowers decorated each table. I came 90 minutes early to personally lay framed images of my parents throughout their marriage on a remembrance table, as well as the hand-illustrated family tree I had spent months constructing as an anniversary gift. By 6:30, visitors began to arrive. My parents emerged to cheers, my mother gorgeous in a blue dress and my father smiling with pride. The smiles on their faces made all of the tension worthwhile, until Brielle came. She and Nathan were 20 minutes late because Brielle insisted on changing clothes 4 times, as I subsequently discovered. She walked in wearing a crimson couture gown that was way too formal, with diamonds sparkling everywhere. Mia trailed following in a smaller imitation of her mother's clothing, appearing uncomfortable. Brielle apologized profusely for being late, air-kissing my mother. Traffic was terrible, and I just had to make sure we looked decent. Some of us recognized the significance of presenting at important occasions. Her gaze shifted to my plain black cocktail dress, which I had picked specifically to avoid drawing notice from my mother. Mom frowned somewhat, but as usual she just thanked Brielle and complimented Mia. The seating arrangements had been meticulously selected. My parents are in the center, surrounded by their oldest friends. Nathan, Brielle and Mia at one end, Holly and I at the other. This was intended to keep Brielle and I at a safe distance. But Brielle had different intentions. As everyone took their seats, she said, "Oh, there must be a mistake. As the eldest son's wife, I should be sitting next to Elaine. On such a significant event, family members should be near, don't you think?" Before I could respond, Mom changed the place cards, displacing my mother's best friend, Diane, who had come in from Arizona for the occasion. The ripple effect caused several other visitors to shuffle, resulting in confusion and uncomfortable stares. I caught Holly's eye from across the table. She gently shook her head, urging me not to cause a disturbance. During appetizers, Brielle dominated the conversation, focusing primarily on her accomplishments. She'd recently been elevated to marketing director at her father's firm, a job that everyone knew was established particularly for her and had no actual responsibilities. "It's simply so satisfying to be rewarded for hard work," she added, gazing directly at me. "Not everyone understands the devotion required to thrive in the business world. Some people choose easier, more creative ways, which is great, I suppose." My father, ever the diplomat, attempted to incorporate me. "Tessa has just finished a large branding project for a new technology business. What was its name again, sweetheart?" Before I could respond, Brielle interjected. "Oh, Richard, speaking of technology, have I told you about the new relationship I've struck with Tesla? Daddy claims it's the largest transaction our firm has ever made." This pattern persisted throughout the evening. Brielle is interrupting, diverting, and covertly undermining everyone, particularly myself. I focused on ensuring that the service ran smoothly, silently talking with the wait staff. As I returned to my seat after conversing with a head waiter, I observed something peculiar. Brielle had temporarily left the table, stating that she needed to freshen herself. As she returned, I noticed her reach inside her enormous luxury handbag and carefully place something in an interior pocket. From my vantage point, I noticed what looked to be a second wallet, distinct from the red leather designer wallet I had previously seen her use. My initial assumption was that she had found an old wallet. However, the furtive manner she glanced about as she did so raised a strong suspicion. Brielle's body language when she was preparing anything wicked has grown more apparent to me over the years. She had a tiny tightening of her eyes, a planning expression. I saw that face now, and it sent shivers down my spine. For a brief while, I pondered addressing her, but various factors kept me back. This was my parents' special night, and they had had enough of our disagreements. Without understanding exactly what she was up to, any charge would sound crazy and petty. And, perhaps most crucially, a little voice inside me said that sometimes the best way to deal with a trap is to let it fall on its own terms. So I watched and waited, keeping a polite look as my mind raced. Brielle returned to her seat and placed her enormous purse on the floor between her chair and mine, despite the fact that the table had a perfectly decent hook under it. The bag was clearly within reach of my chair. Another aspect that seems purposefully manufactured. Throughout the main course, I spoke cheerfully with the other guests while keeping an eye on Brielle's luggage. I noticed her checking it multiple times, apparently for her phone or a tissue, but always with a calculating face. Whatever game she was playing, she was setting the stage with precision, and for the first time in our long history of fighting, I felt one step ahead of her. The tension in the private dining area increased. What should have been a love celebration seemed like a conversational minefield. Elegant platters of osso buco and homemade pasta receded into the background. Uncle Frank, my father's brother, who never quite mastered reading a room, raised the family cabin in Michigan. "So, Richard, have you chosen who would receive the cabin in the will?" Not to seem morbid, but I was discussing inheritance planning with my financial advisor. A deep quiet descended. "Nathan, Holly and I have innumerable great memories from the cabin, which is 3 generations old." It was also a subject of contention since Brielle had stated that she intended to remodel it into a true lake house and effectively claim it as her own. "We haven't made any final decisions," my father remarked cautiously, seeming uneasy. "That isn't really dinner conversation, Frank." But Brielle spotted an opportunity. "So since it came up, Nathan and I have been brainstorming some fantastic ideas for renovating the cabin. It need extensive improvements, and we would be happy to invest in them provided, well, you know." She smiled sweetly. "It would be a very special environment for Mia to grow up in, just like Nathan did." The connotation was very apparent. The cottage should be given to them because they have a child. I felt the usual tightness in my chest that emerged whenever Brielle used her position as the mother of the only grandchild to obtain an advantage. "The cabin is perfect as it is," I responded, trying to keep my voice light. "The entire objective is the rustic charm and family heritage. Modernizing it would eliminate what makes it unique." Brielle's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is a common response from someone who is reluctant to constructive change. The cottage has plumbing from the 1970s, Tessa. Surely even you can tell that something has to be updated." I said that there is a distinction between required renovations and entirely destroying the essence of a site. My mother, seeing the impending storm, immediately shifted the conversation to Holly's recent promotion. But Brielle was not finished. Speaking about careers, she intervened after Holly had just spoken for 45 seconds. "I've heard that graphic design positions are being swiftly displaced by artificial intelligence. Tessa, are you concerned? It must be quite stressful to work in a declining field." All eyes went to me. Classic Brielle, a topic intended to put me on the defensive. "Actually," I responded, keeping a relaxed grin, "human ingenuity and knowledge of emotional resonance are all things AI cannot mimic. My client list is rising as firms notice that link, but I appreciate your concern for my job." The discourse alternated between happy reminiscences and Brielle's stinging remarks. By the time dessert was served, I was emotionally exhausted from the continual attention necessary to avoid her attacks. "Excuse me for a moment," I murmured, getting up. "I need to check with the kitchen about the anniversary cake." In reality, all I wanted was a break from Brielle's calculating look and subtle digs. I stepped out into the restaurant's modest outdoor terrace. I took a deep breath and leaned on the stone balustrade, gazing up at the few stars visible through Chicago's light pollution. In that calm time, I thought about my possibilities. I could follow the pattern of the last 7 years, repelling her attacks. I could escalate, eventually calling her out publicly, or I could find a medium ground that maintained my dignity while without jeopardizing my parents' celebration. As I stood there wondering, I remembered the peculiar behavior of the second wallet. Whatever she had planned, it was certainly destined to happen tonight. The notion gave me a cold. After approximately 7 minutes, I realized I needed to return. As I walked back, I noticed Marco, the owner, talking to a server and indicating toward our private room. He met my gaze and gave me a brief, comforting nod. During the planning process, I discussed the family dynamics to him, and he pledged to assist guarantee that the evening ran successfully. That modest show of solidarity bolstered my determination. When I returned, dessert was served, a lovely tiramisu. As soon as I took my seat, I sensed a change. Brielle sat up taller, an almost imperceptible smile flickering on her lips. Nathan seemed nervous, looking at his dessert. My father was telling me about their honeymoon, but Brielle was hardly paying attention, her gaze shifting between me and her bags, which was still positioned between our chairs. I had barely finished my first mouthful of tiramisu when Brielle screamed loudly, interrupting my father's words. "My wallet," she shouted, bringing her palm to her chest in an exaggerated display of sorrow. "I can't find my wallet." The discussion ended. Everyone turned to look at Brielle, who was now making a show of looking through her bags. Are you certain you brought it? My mother inquired, alarmed. Have you checked your coat? Of course I brought it, Brielle said, swiftly adjusting her expression to one of anxiety. I have it right here. I used it to pay the coat check. Someone must have taken it. She began searching about anxiously, checking beneath the table and requesting that others check near their seats. I observed she took care to keep everyone's attention away from her own purse, where I assumed the missing wallet was still safely kept. Diane mentioned that you may have left it in the restroom. No, Brielle said, her voice rising sharply. It was immediately inside my suitcase. It has all of my credit cards, my driver's license, and even images of Mia that cannot be replaced. As the search extended and visitors began to stand, I noticed Brielle's eyes dart toward me many times, measuring my response. Even as I sensed the trap closing in on me, I kept a neutral demeanor and even assisted in looking about. Wait, Brielle interrupted abruptly, her voice lowering to a dramatic hush. Tessa, when did you leave the table earlier, and where did you go? The question hovered in the air, like a thundercloud. Several individuals looked perplexed, not fully comprehending the meaning, but I understood precisely what she was attempting. I walked to the terrace for some fresh air, responded evenly, and then talked to Marco about the cake. Why are you asking? Brielle's eyes sharpened, and I could see she was pleased that I had walked right into her script. Isn't it funny, she asked slowly, that my wallet disappears just as you leave the table? And you were gone for a long time, weren't you? The mood changed suddenly. I could sense the uneasy tension as people realized what Brielle was implying. My mother was shocked, and my father was perplexed and disturbed. Holly was almost out of her seat, rage on her face, but I caught her eye and gently shook my head. This was between Brielle and I. Are you insinuating that I snatched your wallet? I asked, my voice steady. That's a serious accusation, Brielle. She did not answer directly. Instead, he turned to the entire table and said, Has anyone seen my wallet? It's a red leather Prada with a gold clasp, really unique and definitely costly. No one had, of course, since I was more convinced it was exactly where Brielle had hidden it, waiting for her theatrical unveiling. The private dining area at Salvatore's became utterly quiet. The waitstaff, feeling the tension, had discreetly retreated. Even the gentle Italian music seems to have diminished. Brielle rose up slowly, her chair scratching across the wooden floor, piercing the quiet like a knife. Every eye in the room was on her as she stood up to her full height, her countenance shifting from troubled search to righteous rage. You, she continued, pointing straight at me and raising her voice to a near yell. You stole my wallet, you filthy thief. No one responded for a time as the charge lingered in the air, so terrible and unexpected. My father was the first to recover. Now, Brielle, he continued, his principal's authoritative voice making an unexpected entrance. That is a very serious allegation to make without any evidence. But Brielle remained undeterred. She was completely dedicated to her portrayal, her cheeks flushed with what looked to be real indignation. I have suspected for years that things go missing when Tessa is around, she told me. A set of earrings from the guest bathroom, money from Nathan's wallet, and Mia's birthday gift card from last year. I never said anything because I wanted to maintain the peace. But this is excessive. I felt like I'd been physically hit. Not only was she accusing me of taking her pocketbook tonight, but she was also blaming me for other purported crimes that I had never heard of before to this moment. I looked at Nathan, expecting him to defend me, but he was looking at the tablecloth, his expression inscrutable. That is absolutely not true, I answered, struggling to keep my voice calm. I've never taken anything that did not belong to me. Not tonight, not ever. My rejection appeared to boost Brielle's performance. She turned to face the table, her look now one of sadness and vindication. Do you see how she lies? Always so lovely and innocent. Tessa, a graphic designer. Tessa, the loving daughter. Tessa, whom everyone adores. But I know what she truly is. The visitors shifted uneasily. Some seemed perplexed, while others were ashamed. My mother had tears in her eyes, and my father seemed older than I had ever seen him. The creases on his face deepened as he became distressed. I felt a broad range of feelings. Humiliation consumed me. Anger surged through my temples at the blatant unfairness. But underlying those quick impulses, a weird calm was emerging. I knew what was coming. I'd seen the setup, recognized the trap, and although a part of me wanted to jump to my feet and scream the truth, another, greater part, advised patience. Allow her to play her hand thoroughly. I do not appreciate being called a thief or a liar, I remarked quietly, especially at our parents' anniversary party. Brielle's eyes shone with pride at what she plainly saw as a weak resistance. And then she made the move I'd been waiting for. "Well, if you're so innocent," she said. "You won't mind if we check your things." Before I could react, she reached down to my feet where my little clutch purse was alongside the chair. I purposefully bought a little evening bag that could only accommodate my phone, lipstick and keys in order to avoid bringing anything superfluous. "That's hardly large enough to hide a wallet," Holly pointed out forcefully. "No," Brielle agreed, straightening out with a predatory smile. "But this is." She grabbed for the enormous tote bag that had been resting between our chairs, which I knew belonged to her, but she now claimed was mine. "That's not my bag," I answered gently. "Oh," Brielle lifted a finely sculpted brow. "Then who is it? It's been sitting right beside you all evening." Before I could react, she opened the tote bag and dramatically reached inside. Even though I had expected this moment, the delight on her face as her palm wrapped around what she was looking for made my stomach churn. "Well, well, well," she said, her voice full of feigned astonishment as she triumphantly drew out her red Prada pocketbook. "What do we have here?" "My wallet is in your backpack, see? I knew it was you." The collective gasp from across the table was audible. My mother grabbed her lips and her eyes widened in horror. My father was distraught, split between his want to believe in his daughter and the obviously incontrovertible facts. "Tessa," Nathan eventually said, his voice full of perplexity and regret. "How could you?" That stung more than anything else. The quick assumption of my guilt by my own brother. Brielle's influence had corroded his confidence in me to the point that he didn't examine this preposterous scenario. Brielle's eyes shone with satisfaction as she studied the horrified expressions. She had perfected her moment, producing a setting in which I seemed indisputably guilty. In her eyes, she had finally triumphed, humiliating me so severely that I would never recover. What she hadn't counted on was that I had predicted it from the outset. The stunned silence that followed Brielle's theatrical revelation seemed to last an eternity. My relatives and friends looked at the crimson pocketbook in her palm, then at me, their expressions a combination of perplexity, disappointment, and unease. The ideal anniversary party had gone horribly wrong, and I was suddenly the obvious villain of the evening. And then I did something unexpected. I laughed. It began as a small chuckle and quickly escalated into full-fledged, genuine laughter that I couldn't stop. The absurdity of the situation, Brielle's elaborate trap, and her belief that she had finally outmaneuvered me, all made me laugh. In that moment of tension, my laughter broke the stillness. Brielle's triumphant expression faded, giving way to confusion and anger. "What's wrong with you?" she demanded. "I just caught you red-handed stealing my wallet, and you are laughing." I took a deep breath and composed myself, but a smile remained. "I'm laughing, Brielle," I responded, "because that is not your bag, and we both know it." I pointed to the designer tote that had sat between our chairs all evening. "That is your bag. You purposefully placed it there, and you put your second wallet inside earlier this evening." Her face paled slightly, but she quickly recovered. "What are you talking about?" "This is clearly your bag, and my wallet was inside." "Actually," I said calmly, "if you look inside that bag, you'll notice that it contains items that belong to you, not me. Perhaps your makeup compact with your initials, or the specific brand of hand sanitizer you always carry, or even a small notebook where you jot down perceived slights from family members to discuss later." I'd been paying close attention to Brielle for years, taking note of these minor details. The look of shock on her face told me that at least some of my guesses were correct. "You're trying to confuse everyone," Brielle insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "The fact remains that my wallet was in this bag next to your chair." "Yes," I agree. "In your bag, which you carefully positioned to appear as if it might be mine after I watched you place a second wallet inside it when you returned from the restroom earlier." Gasps and murmurs echoed around the table as the implications became clear. My mother's expression changed from distress to confusion. My father went from disappointment to careful consideration. "This is ridiculous," Brielle exclaimed. "You're making up stories to cover your theft." "Actually," I replied, "there's a way to settle this definitively." I turned toward the back of the room, where Marco, the restaurant's owner, had been quietly watching. "Marco, could you please share what we discussed during the planning of tonight's event?" Marco stepped forward, his professional demeanor tinged with unease. "When Miss Harper was organizing this celebration, she asked about our security measures," he told me. I told her that, following a theft last year, we installed discrete security cameras in all of our private dining rooms. They are primarily intended to protect our guests' belongings, but they record continuously. Brielle's face lost color so quickly that I thought she might faint. You knew, she said quietly, looking at me. You knew there were cameras, and you let me. I knew there were cameras, I stated. What I didn't realize was exactly what you were planning. But when I noticed you hiding something in that bag, I suspected it was something like this. I just didn't expect you to go so far as to publicly accuse me of theft. Nathan had been listening to this exchange with increasing horror on his face. He stood up abruptly. Marco, can you show us the security footage right now? Marco nodded. Of course, we have immediate access to it in my office. I don't think that's necessary, Brielle responded quickly, her voice high and tight. It has gotten out of hand. It was clearly just a misunderstanding. But Nathan was already approaching Marco, his expression grim. I want to see the footage now. I remained seated as Nathan, my father, and Marco exited the room. The atmosphere they left behind was dense with tension. Brielle remained standing, her hands gripping the back of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. My mother glanced between us, her expression unreadable. Holly had a small, satisfied smile on the corners of her mouth. The minutes stretched on indefinitely. Nobody spoke. The remaining guests fidgeted uncomfortably, clearly wishing to leave but constrained by social convention. Finally the door opened, and Nathan returned. His face was set in hard lines I'd never seen before, and his eyes were cold as they focused on his wife. The cameras show everything, he explained, his voice flat. They show Brielle taking a wallet from her purse, putting it in a tote bag, and placing the bag between the chairs. They show her repeatedly checking to make sure Tessa hadn't noticed, and she is clearly seen removing the wallet during her dramatic accusation. Every eye in the room was drawn to Brielle, who now appeared terrified. Nathan, she said. I can explain. Don't. He interrupted her, his voice sharp as a blade. Please don't. We'll discuss it at home. The silence that ensued was deafening. I'd been waiting years for this moment of vindication, for someone in my family to finally recognize Brielle for who she truly was. But now that it had arrived, I felt no triumph, only deep sadness for my brother and niece. I slowly stood up, drawing all eyes to me. Mom, Dad, I said softly. I'm very sorry that this happened during your celebration. This evening was supposed to be about your 41-year love and commitment, not any of this. My mother's eyes welled up with tears, but they weren't the ones I'd seen before. Oh, Tessa, she added. We're the ones who should apologize. We should have seen what was going on. I moved around the table to embrace her, and as I did so, I felt the weight of years of silent pain lift. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally revealed. The remainder of the anniversary dinner took place in a strange, subdued atmosphere. Brielle sat rigid in her chair, barely touching her dessert, while Nathan kept a cold silence. Mia, sensing but not understanding the tension, became increasingly agitated until Holly quietly offered to take her outside for a walk. My parents made a valiant effort to salvage the celebration, thanking guests and reflecting. Their closest friends pulled together admirably, creating pockets of genuine warmth amid the awkwardness. As the evening came to a close and guests began to leave, everyone who approached me did so with a new awareness in their eyes. Some quietly apologized for having doubted me. Others simply squeezed my hand or shoulder, offering silent support. Diane, my mother's best friend, hugged me tightly. I always knew that woman was trouble, she muttered angrily. Good for you for standing your ground. My father appeared shocked. As he assisted my mother with her coat, I noticed him place a protective hand on her back, as if the evening had reminded him of the importance and fragility of family ties. When only my immediate family remained, my father spoke openly about what had occurred. I owe you an apology, Tessa, he said, his voice full of regret. We've noticed tension between you and Brielle for years, but we dismissed it as typical in-law dynamics. We never imagined it would go this deep. My mother nodded, tears forming again. We should have protected you better. We were so focused on keeping the peace that we didn't notice who was causing it. It's not your fault, I assured them, my voice full of emotion. Brielle is extremely skilled at presenting one face to some people and another to others, and I never wanted to force anyone to take sides. Nathan, who had been standing silently near the door, approached us. I need to talk to you, he told me, his voice rough and emotional. Alone if that's okay. We walked out onto the same patio where I had collected myself earlier. The night had become cooler. Nathan took a long look at the city lights before speaking. "I don't even know where to begin," he finally admitted. "I feel like the world's biggest fool." "You're not a fool," I said softly. "You wanted to believe the best in the person you loved. There is nothing foolish about that." He shook his head sharply. "Stop being too understanding. I do not deserve it. For years I've dismissed your concerns, defended her actions, and even accused you of being jealous or difficult. And all this time," his tone rang hollow, "all this time, she was deliberately trying to hurt you, to drive a wedge between us." I had imagined this moment of validation countless times, but now that it had arrived, I found no comfort in my brother's pain. "What are you planning to do?" I asked quietly. Nathan ran his hand over his face, looking exhausted. "I do not know. I need to think about Mia, and what is best for her. But I know I can't simply pretend this did not happen. Brielle's actions tonight were not a momentary lapse in judgment, it was calculated and cruel. It leaves me wondering what else she's capable of." Before I could respond, the patio door opened and Brielle emerged. Her makeup was freshly applied, but it couldn't conceal the redness under her eyes or the tight, defensive set of her mouth. "The car is waiting," she told Nathan, her voice brittle. "Mia is tired." Nathan looked at her for a long time and I noticed a change in his expression, a hardening that I had not seen before. "Take Mia home," he instructed. "I will take a ride with my parents or Tessa. We need some space tonight." Brielle's composure slipped, revealing a moment of panic. "Nathan, please, we need to discuss this." "Yes we do," he confirmed. "Not tonight. Tonight, I need to process what I saw on the security footage." For a brief moment, I expected Brielle to continue her argument, but after a tense silence, she simply nodded and walked away. The sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floors faded as she returned to get Mia. Nathan returned his attention to me after she had left. "I am very sorry, Tess. I know those words are insufficient, but they're all I have right now." I reached out and squeezed his hand gently. "They are enough for tonight. The rest we'll figure out as we go." When we got back inside, my parents and Holly were waiting. Without Brielle's divisive presence, the five of us, our core family unit, stood together in a moment of silent reconnection. Then Holly broke the silence with her characteristic directness. "Well, that was the most dramatic anniversary dinner in history. Congratulations, Mom and Dad. You'll definitely remember this one." Surprisingly, this broke the tension. My father chuckled. My mother smiled through her tears, and even Nathan managed a weak laugh. We gathered our things, thanked Marco profusely for his discretion and help, and made our way out into the night. As we stood on the sidewalk saying our goodbyes, my mother pulled me into a fierce hug. "I am so proud of how you handled yourself tonight," she whispered. "You showed grace under incredible pressure." "I learned from the best," I told her, holding her tight. As I drove home alone later, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. The satisfaction of finally having the truth exposed was tempered by concern for my brother and niece. Family dynamics were complicated, and I knew tonight's revelations would have far-reaching consequences. But for the first time in 7 years, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The constant need to defend myself, to question my own perceptions, to walk on eggshells around Brielle, all of it was shifting. The truth had a power of its own, and once revealed, it could not be unseen. When I reached my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and poured myself a small glass of wine. Sitting by the window overlooking the city, I raised the glass in a silent toast to my parents' 41 years of marriage, to truth, and to the uncertain but hopeful future of our family. In the weeks following that infamous anniversary dinner, our family entered a period of painful but absolutely necessary transformation. The immediate aftermath was exactly as difficult as I had anticipated. Nathan moved into our parents' guest room, explaining to Mia that Daddy needed to help Grandpa with some projects. It was a flimsy excuse that the perceptive 5-year-old clearly didn't fully believe, but it provided a gentle buffer for her. Brielle, for her part, cycled through a range of strategies to manage the fallout. First came tearful apologies and claims she had suffered a momentary breakdown due to stress. When those fell on deaf ears, she attempted to minimize her actions, suggesting everyone was overreacting to what was merely a misguided prank. Finally, when those approaches failed, she resorted to what I suspected was her true nature: cold calculation, hiring an expensive divorce attorney, and threatening to limit Nathan's access to Mia if he pursued separation. That final move backfired spectacularly. The security footage from the restaurant, which Marco had preserved, provided compelling evidence of Brielle's deliberate attempt to frame me and damage my reputation. When Nathan's attorney suggested this demonstrated a pattern of manipulative behavior that might be relevant in custody considerations, Brielle's aggressive stance softened considerably. By the 4-month mark after the dinner, Nathan had filed for divorce and moved into his own apartment. He and Brielle established a tentative co-parenting arrangement, with Mia spending equal time with both parents. The transition was hardest on Mia. "Aunt Tess," she asked me during one of our outings as we shared ice cream on a park bench. "Did Mommy do something bad?" The question caught me off guard, and I chose my words carefully. "Grown-ups sometimes make mistakes in how they treat each other, sweetie. Your mom and dad are working through some grown-up problems, but they both love you very much. That will never change." Mia seemed to consider this seriously, then nodded with the simple acceptance children often show for complex situations. "Daddy's sad a lot now," she observed. "But he smiles more when you visit." My heart ached for her, but also for Nathan. My relationship with my parents also evolved. My father, the lifelong educator, took the situation as a personal failure. "I should have seen what was happening," he told me during a private conversation, his voice heavy with regret. "I observed students and their dynamics for 33 years, but I missed what was right in front of me in my own family." "Dad," I reminded him gently. "Brielle fooled a lot of people for a long time. That was her specialty. My mother, ever the nurturer, focused on healing. She instituted weekly family dinners, minus Brielle, where we gradually relearned how to communicate openly. These gatherings were awkward at first, but over time they became a sanctuary where authentic connection could flourish again." Holly, true to form, approached the situation with characteristic directness. "I've been waiting 7 years to say, 'I told you so,'" she announced to Nathan at one of these dinners. "But now that I can, it doesn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would." Her honesty somehow broke through some of the tension, and Nathan actually laughed, perhaps his first genuine laugh since that night. As for me, the vindication I had longed for came with unexpected emotional complications. For years I had channeled my frustration with Brielle into my work, using graphic design projects as an outlet for emotions I couldn't express within the family. Now that the truth was known, I found myself at a creative crossroads, unsure where to direct that energy. The initial weeks after the dinner were difficult. I experienced a roller coaster of emotions: relief, anger at the years of gaslighting, guilt over my brother's pain, and anxiety about the future. There were nights I lay awake replaying every interaction with Brielle, seeing with new clarity the calculated nature of her behavior from the very beginning. During this period, I sought help from a therapist, Dr. Natalie Reyes, who specialized in family dynamics and emotional recovery. Her guidance was invaluable. "What you experienced was a form of psychological abuse," she explained. "Having your perceptions repeatedly denied or dismissed can make you question your own reality. That's called gaslighting, and recovery takes time." With Dr. Reyes's help, I began to rebuild my sense of self-trust. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away, many of whom had sensed something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. I focused on self-care, setting aside time for activities that nourished my spirit, hiking along Lake Michigan, taking a pottery class, reading for pleasure again. Professionally, I channeled my renewed energy into my design business. I'd always been good at my work, but now I found a new level of confidence in my creative vision. I took risks with clients I might have avoided before, proposing bold concepts that pushed boundaries. To my surprise, these were often the ideas that resonated most strongly. Within 8 months, I landed 3 major contracts with national brands and hired my first employee to help manage the increased workload. The most profound healing, however, came through an unexpected channel. About 6 months after the anniversary dinner, I received a message from a woman named Claire, who introduced herself as Brielle's former college roommate. She had heard about the incident through mutual acquaintances and reached out because, as she put it, "I've been where you are." Over coffee at a quiet cafe, Claire shared her own experiences with Brielle during their university years. The patterns were strikingly familiar: the careful cultivation of allies, the subtle undermining, the elaborate setups designed to make Claire appear unstable or unreliable. The conversation was both validating and healing, a confirmation that what I had experienced wasn't isolated or imagined. "It took me years to trust my own perceptions again after living with her," Claire confessed. But you know what helped the most? Finding others who had been through similar experiences, knowing I wasn't alone. Inspired by this connection, I started a small private support group for people recovering from relationships with manipulative individuals. We met monthly, sharing stories and strategies for healing. Through helping others, I found my own path forward, transforming pain into purpose. As the 18-month anniversary of that fateful dinner approached, I reflected on everything that had changed. Nathan was dating again cautiously, a kindergarten teacher he met at one of Mia's school events. My parents seemed lighter, their relationship strengthened by weathering the crisis. Holly had been promoted and was considering a master's degree. And me, I had learned lessons that would shape the rest of my life. I learned the value of patience, of strategic thinking, of waiting for the right moment rather than reacting immediately. I learned that sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is simply allowing the truth to reveal itself. Most importantly, I learned that standing in your truth, even when others doubt you, is not selfishness, but self-preservation. For years, I had silenced myself to keep the peace, believing that harmony required my silence. Now, I understood that real harmony can only exist where truth is honored and respected. The last time I saw Brielle was at Mia's 6th birthday party, a carefully orchestrated neutral event at a children's play center. We acknowledged each other with tight nods from across the room, but didn't speak. I noticed she wore a mask of cheerful politeness that never quite reached her eyes, and I wondered if she had already found new targets for her manipulations. But that was no longer my concern. I had reclaimed my voice, my family, and my power. The journey through pain had led to a place of authentic strength, and that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest growth comes through our deepest wounds. The very experiences designed to break us can become the foundation for building a more genuine, powerful version of ourselves if we have the courage to face them honestly and the wisdom to transform them into something meaningful.